This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 5 amazing individuals. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, and Michael Fritchie. If you want to support the show, you can become a patron at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I have with me Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hello, everybody.
Super Saxon man.
I'm going to kill Matt Festa for that if I ever meet him in real life. Hi, everybody.
And Wren.
Hey, everyone.
We did our, we're recording this at the same time we recorded the UFO Disclosure Show, and I didn't introduce you guys. I'm very sorry. People just have to figure out who you are.
Yeah. It's all right.
And come on, Super Saxon man is a great name.
No, actually, it is cool. I know. I'm teasing. Honestly, I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't come up with it before Matt did. But Matt always drops things on me that are awesome, and I wish I had found or thought of before.
Yes. Matt is
makes me think of that Saxon album, that one with a guy with a sword running at the.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so tonight's show, I wanted to get into some deep thoughts on things. When we're recording this, my brother passed away yesterday. And he was a few years younger than me, and I kind of always had a feeling that was probably going to be the case, but it definitely led me down some deep holes in a sense. Like my brother and I were close back, when he still lived around here because we went to concerts all the time. He came up to my music show all the time. When he moved to Rochester, we kind of drifted apart for various reasons. And one of the things that I find interesting is the way that we establish families, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because, he basically had a whole support system there that, to me, it felt like that's more his family than I am at this point.
Right.
But when, it just made me think about a lot of this different deep ways of looking at reality, why we're here. And to me, I still have a hard time feeling like things are not planned out somewhat, even when the bad things happened. I think I talked to you guys, I don't remember who was on, about being feeling like I get puppeted to be in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this happened again, last week, where I had to run to Ithaca, and I got behind someone who was doing 30 in a 55, and it literally added an extra 15 minutes to my trip. And I was frustrated, but I got to where I needed to go on time, and then I had to stop on the way back at a computer customer's, and I pulled in, and there was this woman I had passed kind of frantically walking down the street. And I actually couldn't find the guy's house because I was coming from a different direction, so I had to turn around. She was walking back down the street, and this was when it was 95 degrees out. And so I pull into his driveway, I turn everything off. I get out of my car, and this dog comes running up to me. And of course, I'm happy because a dog just came running up to me. And I'm like, oh, dog. Well, apparently she had been chasing this dog. It was her dog, and the dog refused to come to her. And she had been chasing it back and forth across the street, up and down the street. It kept getting away, running away, and then it just ran right over to me. And she's first telling me he's not going to bite, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'm sitting here petting him. And then, she's like, please hold him. And I'm like, yeah, okay. He was a small little curly-haired black dog and super friendly. And then she just comes over, she puts the leash, she's like, you got away, I've been chasing him forever. She's like, I didn't think I was ever going to get him, and it's so hot. And I'm just like, is this why I had to drive 30 miles an hour to Ithaca?
Yeah, right.
It literally feels like being puppeted. And it always brings me back to that free will discussion. I guess I could have done things differently and not been there right at that, but I just didn't fight it. I was just like, I'll just be patient. It's going to put me where I need to be. So
Go ahead.
to me, like, I don't know, I guess I like helping people in life because everyone kind of benefits when I think when you take that approach.
Yeah.
And I think, when people say things like, well, what's life about? I think it's about creating a better life for everyone. I think it's about creating art and things that people can connect with. Because really, when you're creating art, you're trying to bring out emotion in other people. You're trying to connect to other people. So I think creation is a big part of why we're here, but why we need to connect to one another. Because you could say, and I fully believe we're all interconnected at some level to begin with. But when you're separated out and then you have to reconnect, it creates something new. So I will let one of you continue.
Yeah, so I think, especially when you want to help people and being sort of disposed to being connected to the universe, however we want to phrase that, you do find yourself being in those places sometimes, and it feels like it was a little bit out of your control. But I think at some level, you've consented to that,
right,
or agreed to be a partner in that process. And I've thought about that particularly a lot, how those things come around. And it's interesting because sometimes you'll find yourself in a place to do something that's very small for yourself, but might be huge for somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's almost weird, and not in a bad way, but you have that sense of like, why is this, like, it's no big deal to me. Calm down, almost, like you're making me uncomfortable. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But it's because I think you've agreed to play that role when you have the opportunity to do it. But the second thing you said, like, I have all kinds of paradigms in my head that don't probably work completely with each other. They're not necessarily congruent with each other.
Well, they don't have to be.
They don't have to be, no. But I think part of like our experience as human beings is about being better than our lizard brain selves. And it's almost that's part of the test or the learning of being in the physical existence as a fleshy creature, is defying whatever base instincts are built into our brains to be wary of each other, to other each other, and things like that. And how do we appeal to what's higher and work towards that?
Yeah,
it's a balance.
It is. And sometimes you need your animal brain, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
For me at least, and I struggle with, I think like anybody who was raised with a particular way of thinking, like, if you were raised Catholic or if you were raised Muslim, you're sort of trained to believe there's a particular answer to life and death that exists. And then, you get older and you sort of move away from that and you try to figure your own way. So I have, there's this, it's essentially this kind of like struggle between sort of an alchemical way of looking at it and then a lot of, the things which I think are true that come from Advaita Vedanta, which I sometimes incorrectly refer to as Adi Vedanta because of Adi Shankara, who is the person who is essentially the progenitor of Advaita Vedanta. But within that, there's this idea, it's of the body or the jivatma in the terminology of it being like a vehicle for some sort of apotheosis or some sort of transformation of consciousness somehow, and that's blending it with this idea, this sort of very alchemical concept, which is the sort of more philosophical alchemical concept of the transformation of the self, the distilling of the self, however you want to think of it. And, for me in that sense, and I don't know if it's something I'll always feel, but at least right now, it does feel like there's, I don't want to say it's like a block universe, but there is some sort of idea of, or for me, there does feel to be some pull of, not fate, but it's like a good analogy would be maybe like, you're in a train going to a particular destination and you can move around in that train and do certain things, but there's still some sort of momentum taking you to a particular place.
I like that.
And so I feel like there are some things that I'm able to do, and I can have this, very, depending on what direction I look at or what car I go to or whatever, but I'm still heading in a particular direction. And if I really stop and kind of feel that momentum, I'll feel myself going that way. So yeah, I do think, without being able to really explain it, I do think there is something that is driving some force. Yeah.
I really love that analogy. That one's great.
That's very similar to how I kind of feel about things right now, in that I've been thinking a lot about destiny lately, and how magic interacts with what we consider destiny. And I sort of conceive of it as like a river, like time and being a river with currents and eddies and flows. And that, if you're just riding along the river, you will be moved to certain places based on those currents. Right. And that something like magic gives you the ability to alter those currents, or, gives you a motorboat or something. You can kind of,
yeah.
Or, I mean, like in general, and that's the whole idea too about destiny and that current, is that you can swim against it. But it's difficult. Right? Like it's easier to just go with the flow. But then again, the flow might not be taking you where you want to go either. Right. So it's all about like finding that balance between allowing destiny to take you certain places, but also realizing that as a human being, like as a divine being, you have free will and the ability to swim against the current if you need to.
And that also brings me to a dilemma I will have sometimes, where it's like, okay, is this sequence of events happening because it's the universe telling me I'm going the wrong way? Or is this a challenge I'm supposed to overcome?
I mean, I think that's a useful element. I feel like I've fallen away a good deal from Thelema over the past couple of years after getting into it pretty heavily, in like 2020 and such. But one of the things that I still take away from it that I found useful is that idea of true will, that like a person living in accordance with their true will, of like what they're sort of destined to do in this life. The universe kind of falls in place for them. Yeah. Like the path is easy. And I've come across this too. I've been in a book group that's rereading through Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. And he talks about both like you've got basically like 3 guardian angels, right? And they correspond to Agrippa's idea of the world being separated into the divine world, the celestial world, and the material world. Mm-hmm. And you have a divine angel that's like appointed to you directly via God, right? That guides and protects you and advises you in your life. Mm-hmm. You also have a celestial angel that is appointed to you based on the circumstances of your birth. So like your astrological chart, basically, like how the spheres were arranged when you were born. And then you have the angel of the material world, which is the angel of profession. So this is literally, if you're like a librarian, this is like the angel of librarians. It's sort of a almost like a patron saint of like whatever you do. And what Agrippa talks a lot about is how a person who is like living in such a way that like harmonizes with the nature of these spirits, right? Their life ends up being like much easier and more comfortable, or like at least smoother, like things, there aren't constant hardships and such. And in some cases, that can be a key to understanding like if you're kind of following your destiny or not. But there's also a danger there too in thinking like not necessarily every bad thing that happens to you happens because you aren't living your true will or whatever.
Right. Because we learn a lot more from the bad experiences. Like I think there are bad experiences we need to go through in order to progress. Like we evolve and we progress because we've had to deal with the bad. And if everything's easy and flows right along, it's kind of like what are you getting out of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's literally I've been going through Orphic theology and Thomas Taylor's book about the Eleusinian mysteries, and there's a line from the Aeneid that Saxon, what you were talking about, made me think of, where Aeneas is going down into Hades, and the line is, easy is the path that leads down to hell. Grim Pluto's gate stands open day and night. But to retrace one's steps and escape the upper regions, this is a work. This is a task. Some few, whom favoring Jove loved, or illustrious virtue advanced to heaven, the sons of gods have affected it, but that like the work of bettering yourself, like the work of living like a higher existence where you help people, like that's hard. Like that's a hero's task, and that's a hero's journey that you have to undergo to do that. It's easy to just live in a way where you never have, you never help anyone, you never look out for anyone but yourself. That's easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of memes going around about how people don't grow up or stuff like that, And I think part of that in our culture comes down to the fact that a lot of times we don't have rituals that kind of transition into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think until you're responsible for other people, you don't really get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had a friend say to me once that he didn't actually realize his actions affected other people until he had children. And I was like, this just made I've known this guy for a long time, and I'm like, that makes so much sense that you said that, because that explains your behavior.
Yeah.
But, I feel like he's probably not the only one that just doesn't really have that concept. I think as you get older, you usually get it, but sometimes it takes having to be responsible for someone else's life, even if it's just a pet sometimes.
Yeah.
So I mean, what do you, so are you, how can I put this? Do you think the main point of being here is to evolve who we are?
So there's a very specific, and this is just something that I'll share because it probably hasn't been shared before, because I find it interesting, from the Meher Baba work. And it's essentially, again, this kind of conflagration or confluence of Sufism, mysticism, and Advaita Vedanta that kind of form what the basis of his cosmology is. But very simply, what he said, and for anybody who doesn't know I'm talking about, this was a mystic in the who lived between 1894 and 1969 out of India, and he's sort of popular a little bit in like hippie counterculture in the 60s, and then before that, prior to World War II, in the sort of like mystical yogi fetishism of the West. But anyway, and he said that very specifically what sort of the universe is. It's really interesting because it's a very similar idea to this book that I've been rereading called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, which was this book that got referenced a lot in the Gateway Process report for the CIA. Anyway, circular talking here. But what this the idea is that the world, or I'm sorry, creation, everything is essentially this like infinite intelligence that is unconscious. And this is outside of time, space, in any way that we can possibly imagine it. And that this intelligence that is infinite and has no beginning or end unconsciously needs to know itself. And creation is essentially the means by which this intelligence goes through the process of knowing itself. So what we are is we're these fractalized parts of this intelligence. We're actually the same. You and I are all the same. We're just, we've been divided up into these sort of different parts so that we can experience everything and then come back to the, I guess, the oneness. This is part of the Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualist idea, this sort of infinite oneness of intelligence, but this time there will be consciousness of that, so essentially what happens is you have these different fractalized souls that go through all these experiences and then realize themselves to be this infinite intelligence that many people call God again, but you've brought with you all these various experiences that are now part of the oversoul. So you have this individuality, but you also have the connected existence with all these other souls that have gone through all these different experiences. So essentially, creation is here, and we're here in order to know ourselves. And it's a process of, knowing ourselves that exists out of space and time. So it's really a cycle. Yeah. It's sort of continually happening. And I find that to be interesting. I think that's an interesting way of looking at, not necessarily new. We see that in all other philosophies, but it's one that I keep on coming back to.
I feel like that. I don't know. I feel like there's no one thing that's going on. I think that we live in a universe that's incredibly diverse, but we assume that like life and death are all singular, like instead of being diverse. So I think when someone dies, there could be any number of things. Like they may rejoin, where they came from, or they may reincarnate, or maybe they'll move on to something else and be someone's spirit guide. Maybe they'll, beyond anything we could probably imagine, because we can't really fully understand that realm from here. Even people who have near-death experiences, we don't know if those are what happens when you actually die, but they can't fully, render that world here.
Yeah.
So, I think that's possible. Seth would say that, your individuality does survive on some level. And then, like, he even talks about how it sort of fractures out and creates other souls that then reincarnate.
Well, that is kind of basically what I was saying too. The individuality is not lost. It's just there's this connection and I think that people get scared of the idea of losing their individuality, but it's not. Oh, yeah. It's not that it gets lost. It's just that the individuality is much larger than we could imagine it to be. You know what I mean? It's something like that we ourselves, each of us, have these sort of consciousness that's a lot more expansive than what we are aware of right now. Yeah. And that could include, the, higher, guardian angel spirits, or, these different bodies, or all these different ways of thinking about the sort of larger human being that exists beyond just sort of this meat puppet, thing we're walking around in right now.
The meat suit.
Yeah.
I sort of think about, I don't know, I conceive of myself as simply like a pseudopod of a like higher dimensional like intelligence, right? That is experiencing this world. And I'm like one little tentacle that's been poked into 3D space to experience things. And that higher up, whatever this thing is, exists outside of what we would even understand as time, right? And so all of my like past lives and all my future lives, it's all the same if you go back to the source, right? And it's very similar to the Meher Baba idea. And even like you said, there's a lot of different cultures and philosophies that come to this like same sort of conclusion that the individuality is sort of an illusion too. Mm-hmm. Like you really aren't an individual in the sense that like your highest self it is just all one. It's one thing. Yeah. You have sort of this illusion of individuality because you're experiencing a life in this incarnation, in this sort of 3D space in which we see time as a perspective. Yeah.
I was rereading the Seth book, and I really, there was a lot that I was really like, oh yeah, this is very similar to a lot of the stuff that I was taught growing up, and I hadn't read the Seth stuff since like the 90s.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, all the stuff in like Orphic theology that's like basically it's very Buddhist, and it's I was actually I was joking around that like all of these Victorian basically like Victorian Hindu weebs or Buddhism weebs like got really into it, and I'm like because how much that Orphic theology was like suppressed by the Church of Rome and stuff, and it's like, guys, we have Buddhism at home. It's called Orphism. You can just
totally. And that's what makes me think that there is, when people talk about, I think I was saying this when there was the show that with AP on Theosophy and Blavatsky, is that there's this, there doesn't have to be like an ancient, formalized order that had the secrets. Like part of me thinks that the secret is that like all of these different, sort of mystics and yogis and people throughout the ages, they've kind of been saying something sort of similar. It's like a different version of it. And, maybe that's just the elephant thing, that's that we're just seeing different parts of the elephant, and they happen to be sort of similar enough that we can be like, oh, yeah, but I do feel like there's something there. Like there's this kernel that maybe it's intangible or it defies language for us to really, pin down exactly what it is. But there is some similarity there that maybe is that this is like, the secret, the secret doctrine.
It gives me the impression too that like there is such a thing as divine truth, right? Like there is a reality to the things we're talking about that various cultures, various philosophers, various civilizations have all come to the same conclusion, because that central conclusion is true and is real. We just express it differently because of our cultures and our mythologies are different, but the core tenets of it are always the same.
That doesn't, though, I think, explain all of this weird phenomena and tech. Like, why does ceremonial magic work then? What is, like, what are these experiences people have had, different places they've gone? That's the sort of like, it's like easy to kind of have this nebulous sort of idea of what the universe might be like, but all the stuff that we're experiencing and sort of dealing with, like, that's what I'm trying, like, how does that fit in there? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I definitely do feel like there is like some exchange going on. I mean, I'm not the first person to speculate that like Buddhists came back with Alexander to Greece and spread these ideas to Greeks in the Hellenistic era, like. But I definitely do think that you have this, because I guess people like sort of think about the ancient world as if like people never traveled anywhere. Like people stayed in the same little areas their entire life.
Yeah.
People traveled all over the world. And like these ideas, I think, spread in ways that we really can't understand now, because there's no like record of it, really. All we can really see is the contours of those migrations of ideas.
Yeah. We were talking before we started the show about the concept of like people incarnating together. And that's something Seth brings up that he, what did he say? In one of the books, he says something like, when you die, you will, reunite with some of the same people you've reincarnated with numerous times. And he said that some of the people you're closest with in your current life are not the people that you're actually closest with. So when you're in that other world outside of life, it's other souls maybe that you're closer to, but you don't have contact with in this life.
That's interesting. I mean, I know that my only real past life experience, I had the distinct impression that two of the people I was with that I was very close friends with were in that past life memory with me as well, in like similar sort of roles and relationship. And I have no way of like proving that or knowing that's valid, but I do think that in some cases you live out lives with the same sort of people, right? Like a person that you meet in this life, you might have known them in a previous life too, and that maybe isn't always the case, and probably isn't the case for most people, but in some cases, I think that it can definitely be true.
Well, and I mean, when you have the kids who remember their past lives, a lot of times they'll be like, oh yeah, they'll tell their parents, oh, you were my brother in that life, or something like that.
Yep.
It's like the roles are different, and the kid understands this, which makes no sense to adults who are like, what? No, why are you're just making stuff up,
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of the similar stuff that, that's very common too, in sort of, especially in Indian ideas of reincarnation, is that there is that, like, you're fulfilling these different, your lovers in one lifetime, your mother and son in another, your brother and sister in another, your business partners in another. And then there's this idea that I really like, of thinking about it in the sort of the as above, so below, in that you see this way that the universe, as far as we know it, sort of clusters, and you can see this happen too, just in the way, in physics. And, here there's this certain, clustering of things that come together in a vacuum. And that what's happening for our souls too is that you're basically getting, how did I hear it described? That it's like there are wave bubbles, which are, like Earth, like this planet is a wave bubble, or this solar system. So it's like a big, if you're thinking of like the ocean, the universe is some infinite ocean, or creation is an infinite ocean, that you have these like waves. So there's motion and all these bubbles that are kind of clustered together for these, certain period of the wave. And then there are drop bubbles. So you have like the, within the wave, there are the individual drops that are in there too. So there's something that's moving as an entire system, which is like the solar system or the Earth, or I don't know. But then you also have these other little clusters of things that are moving together within that larger structure and have their own intertwining relationships, but then, move apart probably at some point.
So have all of you had the experience where you meet someone and you feel like you're just catching up with an old friend?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So I'll contrast that too, because, before we started recording, I was talking about, I've got a buddy that I've known for 37 years, and, we've just kept up with each other and lived in different places and stuff like that and all these things. But we've known each other since we were in second grade. And, he's closer to me than any of my siblings are, because I've known him that long, and he's been around for more experiences than my siblings might have been. But, I met somebody probably 3 years ago through like a business interaction. And, I told somebody it was like an old friend I had just met. And, I still don't see this person that much around, but every time I do, it's just like, it goes back to feeling like, man, I have known this guy for, 100 years, and he seems like family to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And the people I get that with are usually the people I stay friends with a long period of time.
Yeah. Do you find that you can pick back up with those people easier if there has been a hiatus?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll go years without talking to them, and then we just pick right back up.
Yeah. And I almost think that like there's an emotional maturity there too, because those people are willing to understand that life happens. Yeah. And they're just glad they know you.
Yeah. You drift apart from certain people. I mean, life takes us in different directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even like, when I heard Joshua Cutchin on Micah's show, not only was I like, I need to get this guy on, I immediately was like, I'm going to be friends with this guy.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know if that's so much the same as feeling like I knew him as much as just like maybe being able to pick out like, oh, his personality and my personality will click well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's hard to say, but there are definitely people where it's like, God, I've just met you and I feel like I've always known you, and I got to remember that I don't actually know you.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a weird thing, and I wonder if those are the people that you're traveling through multiple worlds with.
They might be. I have I've talked about this guy on the show. I actually refer to him as my brother sometimes too, even though he's not actually. I met him in Thailand at a Muay Thai gym, and it turned out we had been at some of the same places doing martial arts, like across the room from each other. We just hadn't met until we met in Thailand. Huh. Yeah, and I sort of have a weird, we can either call this trauma bond or something else. He and I and 3 other guys had gone down to a swimming pool that wasn't too far from the gym. And while we were there was a Japanese couple there with their 2 kids that were in the pool. And we were all sitting in the hot tub just relaxing because we were bruised and beat up and those things. And the son of the Japanese couple drowned or began to drown, I guess would be the way to put it. And the guy I referred to as my brother and one of the other guys that was with us, one of them had been a first responder, the other had been in the RAF and had done search and rescue. And so they jump out of the pool, start calling off how they're going to resuscitate the child to each other and do CPR on this kid. And he starts, just vomiting out massive amounts of water, far more than he should have had in his little body. I mean, it was one of those things you're just like, I don't know, it was shocking. But anyway, I've stayed friends with that group of guys forever since then. And that was kind of the first time we had all hung out as a group. And when interesting things happen in our lives, one of us usually is around visiting the other one right afterward or something like that. And I still sort of have like a little, I don't even know what to call that, but something about that experience. And I also think just Thailand's a little bit of a magical place in some areas. Yeah, I mean, they're more open to these things. You see people walking around with charms and amulets to protect themselves.
Right.
But something about that tied us all together.
Mm-hmm. So what was I just going to say? I was so busy listening to your story that I forgot what the next thing I went to mention was. Thanks, Super Saxon Man.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So I can never completely throw out the idea that this is really some sort of simulation / video game type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I always come back to that where it's like, there's really no evidence it's not.
Yeah.
You know, and that we might already be in, you know, the year 3000 and we're in a simulator simulating the year 2023.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's again what like me and Chris were talking about. It's not like that idea is new. I mean, that's Mara. Like that's the idea that the material world is an illusion anyway, right? And that idea is way older than computers or simulations or video games.
Yeah, it is. And it's really funny too, because a lot of the language that's built around this, like avatar, that term avatar is a Hindu term, which is very specific. And, you know, the fact that there's all this stuff that, you know, I think has been integrated into the building of these sort of, I guess, like models. I mean, who's the guy that is, I want to say he is like a Advaita Vedanta Hindu, and he wrote, God, what is it? It's Laird Scranton is, I think, right? But somebody else, and I'm completely forgetting his name. Anyway, my point being is I think that there's a lot of like people who are researching in these fields and thinking about things, you know, from a modern technological standpoint are also, you know, integrating or building this stuff, are thinking about these sort of ancient ways of imagining sort of reality and illusion. So I don't think that it's like, I think that it's sort of being, my point being, I think it's being carried through to the present in the way that people are imagining things, you know, from like holographic universe, you know, these are just different ways of articulating a similar idea.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the daemon too, right?
Well, not exactly. Daemon's more like dealing with your higher self or a spirit that sort of is there to guide you.
Okay.
So if you were playing a video game, you running the controller would be the daemon for the character in the video game.
Okay.
Right. But this whole, like, the idea that there's, you know, and I feel like people have talked, other much more intelligent people have talked about this than I, but, you know, this idea that in a video game, so you have like this code that is something that is completely like, it has nothing to do in terms of its aesthetics or its look or its feel with what the product is of what you're playing, but it is the base of the world in which you inhabit. And without that code, there would be no world. So the code is actually the real true reality of this world. But then there's the other idea that then you as a consciousness are using that code to experience this sort of sensory environment, you know, where you're doing things and stuff like that. But that's not actually reality. The real reality is the code, but then the real reality, maybe it isn't the code, maybe it's your consciousness that's driving it. So I think like a lot of the, you know, the model that we've set up for sort of contemporary like VR theory or, you know, holographic theory, it's in dealing with all of these sort of, or in building models of what the universe might be like. You know, we're sort of enacting our own godness, if that makes any sense. You know, we're like we've reached the point where we're building our own virtual worlds within something that is, you know, a virtual world. Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely the chaos magic idea of what magic is, right? you're like basically manipulating the code that is on, right? And anyone who's like ever used something like a memory or like a hex editor or a memory scraper with a game, something like Cheat Engine or something, and like have manipulated things in the game like in real time, like that definitely has parallels with what doing magic can be in some cases.
And like what we were talking about before, you know, the game has a path that you're going to follow. So if you're using a cheat code is like using magic in real life, you're still on that path.
Yeah.
You're just using a tool to make the path a little bit easier.
But it is also, too, I didn't think about this before, because it's a useful analogy in the sense that magic has its limits as well, right? Like, you can only really change things so much before they break. And in the case of a game breaking, it would crash, right? But in the case of reality, it just doesn't do anything. It doesn't do what you wanted it to do.
Right.
You're trying to... been that rubber band too far.
Which is also,
and maybe there are other. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, which might be also why people are like, well, if you could do magic, why don't you summon $1 million? And it's like, that's not part of my path,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
I forget what I was going to say now.
I'm sorry.
There was something about that. It's okay. It wasn't important.
So
I didn't remember it.
So, I mean, one of the things that always drew me to the paranormal and stuff like this was that, we believe that we have a concept of how reality works, even though we really don't. We've figured out some of the rules and some of the laws, but we're constantly finding that, oh, well, these laws of physics don't seem to work in this, or they don't, and then we got quantum physics, which just messes everything up. And we know very little, even though we feel like we know a lot because we can make things that work within these systems. But when you start looking at all the stuff that, we talk about on this show, for the most part, the unexplained stuff, to me, that's the more valuable stuff to look at, because it gives us an insight into how we perceive reality when we're not, like when things are acting differently. You know what I mean? Like anyone could experience a car driving by and they're going to share a similar experience, but not everyone experiences a Bigfoot encounter.
Right.
To take it back to the video game analogy, in that regard, sometimes it's more interesting to me when I'm playing a game to try to find all of the glitches, right? And all the things broken, right? Like, because sometimes those are funny and sometimes those are like fun to interact with.
Yes.
And what are these anomalies in reality, but like glitches in that?
And you had your own glitch of reality one day.
Yeah. I've literally seen something that looked like it was a game glitching out.
Tell people that story. It's been a long time since you told that story.
Yeah, just I was in the woods when I was a kid, hiking with my dad and my little brother, and I got ahead of them and went around a bend that led down into a hollow. And down inside the hollow, I heard like a metallic clanking sound, and I looked down there, and there was just like triangles moving in the hollow, very glitchy. Kind of looked like a quadruped, like had 4 legs, and at least what I remember is sort of like a low polygon white tiger, like sort of white and black triangles, but with the general shape of that like kind of like 4-legged thing running. And I looked at it for about like a second and a half, and then I turned around in the opposite direction and just started running. Got back to my dad and my little brother, and they made fun of me endlessly. When we ended up, getting back to that spot, it was gone. Whatever.
Of course, or it fully rendered into an animal.
Yeah. Or
that's a good point.
I mean, and the thing is, the way we perceive reality is not. I mean, none of what we're seeing. I was trying to explain this to a friend of mine, and he could not grasp it. That you look and you say, "Oh, look, this is a table." But what we're perceiving is not what's actually there. Like our brain is painting, all those are vibrations, and our brain is painting pictures based on what it's perceiving with our senses. Mm-hmm. So there's no empirical table. There's a vibration that we interpret as a table. Right. And so when we have weird experiences too, I mean, it makes sense to me that people rarely, even if they're both, if you have 2 witnesses seeing the same thing, a lot of times they'll see it slightly differently because your brain's struggling to figure out what is this vibration.
At least you didn't use a chair as the example, or else you would have fallen to the oldest Platonic cliche. Yeah, I mean, what we experience via our senses. I mean, the same. The same philosophies say that they are just illusions, and in your case you're saying they're like vibrations. I mean, in Orphic theology, they're just the gross material, right? They're a corrupt form or a corrupted version of a higher truth or a higher form that exists, and that sort of the purpose of life is to contemplate those divine forms rather than get lost in the illusion of the material.
Yeah,
right.
Well, and one of the things that I dislike about some of the spiritual paths is how they vilify the material. Like, I think obsession with the material is bad, but I think it's okay to enjoy your life while still having a spiritual path.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think I feel like a lot of that is extensions of dogma, like people who figure, because there are like, that is one way to get to a particular place.
Sure.
And I don't know why it's become so predominant, but in terms of it being a philosophy, but I mean, what I'm saying is I agree with you. And I think that it's, the idea of that idea of austerity and this sort of Gnostic hatred and rejection of the evil world is really not, I feel like that's kind of a warping of some of the original spiritual like kernels that these religions have come through. That's just my sort of sense from sorting through it all.
Well,
that's something which has become more of a focus than it necessarily needs to be, or people are thinking about it in the wrong way.
Yeah, well, it seems like it's like, okay, you're here just to get out of here. It's like going out somewhere and being like, well, let's hurry up and just get home. It's like, well, why did you leave home in the first place then?
Yeah, I get a feeling that it was really supposed to get at is this idea that you're not like, that there's more than this. So, you're not here to accumulate as much wealth as you, at the, I don't know, stepping on the backs of others or something. I don't know.
Right.
That's maybe me just interpreting it my own way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I've been reading a lot of like Orphic theology stuff, and it very much falls somewhat into that camp of Gnostic thought. Like, the material world's corrupt, it's evil ultimately. But there's a line, I think this is Plotinus, where he says, hence says he is Narcissus, by catching at the shadow, plunged himself in the stream and disappeared. So he who is captivated by beautiful bodies, does not depart from their embrace, is precipitated not with his body, but with his soul into a darkness profound and repugnant to intellect, through which, remaining blind both here and in Hades, he associates forever with shadow. And the way I interpret that is that, like, it's fine to enjoy your life, because I love incarnation. Like, I love being incarnated.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Like, I love the bodybuilding stuff I do. I love creating art. I love just interacting with the physical world. And what I think, if you take away anything from those Gnostic ideas, it's that just like, don't get obsessed with the material world.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, don't get lost in the sauce. Like, make sure that you understand that there is more to it than what you can see and what you can touch. And that, like you said, Chris, like, I mean, you even see this in the Gospels, right? The whole, it is easier for a camel to go through a needle's eye than a rich man to enter heaven. This idea that, like, just accumulating things isn't the point being here, right? Like, no one, that isn't, it certainly can make your life more comfortable, but it's not going to make your life more fulfilling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's so many mindsets that are built around that, like accumulating things, conquering things, but and on the flip side too, I think that another part of that, a positive way of looking at, at that kind of, the idea, the Gnostic idea, is that when suffering does happen, is that, like, it's not the end of the world. You know what I mean? That, what you are going through in terms of, suffering, I guess there's this idea that maybe comes out of Old Testament, that you're being either punished for something,
right,
like, and that it's just understanding that suffering, like pain and pleasure, that it's just, this is more of like a sort of Zen way of looking at things, is that there's a balance, because that's the nature of this world, is there's this push and pull between the negative and the positive.
Yeah. So one thing I thought about that too, and maybe it's a corruption also of this idea, and I think y'all have touched on this in different ways already, though. But as you get more in tune with things, the less desire you have for stuff, maybe, and the places you find enjoyment in life change. But it's a misread of that, where, and for sure, Western Christian tradition is very punitive. But it gets sort of misinterpreted and illustrated out there as a denial of these things will get me to this place quicker. Yeah. And that's not really it, though. I mean, it's easy to meditate all day if you're in a monastery in the mountains, but do you really know what life is like? Do you know what relationships with people are like?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the totally.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it'd be far cooler to do that in the daily life, you have in the world.
Although I do think that, everyone's path is different for a reason. So maybe some people do have that, but it's the fact that these religions preach this as the only way.
Yeah.
You know, too, we also risk a little bit of cultural relativism here, thinking about this too, because I mean, as like a bunch of guys that live in the modern West, in a first world country, like we have some of the most comfortable lives of any
absolutely
in the entirety of human history. You know, like,
True.
When you talk about everything suffering, like for people thousands of years ago, that might have been true. I mean, most people's lives might have been short, hard, and
they probably were.
You know?
So, but there is more and more evidence that wasn't the case. That people did live longer than we thought, and they participated more in art than we thought. And like that, some of this stuff is coming out archaeologically slowly.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were really dark times in every culture, but like I think the human thing is to create and to live life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying you're not making a good point, because you are.
Yeah.
Well, so here's a side addition to that, and I've heard you all talk about this in different ways on other shows we've done, but how much the phenomena and creativity are the same.
Yeah.
I was reading, is it Rick Rubin that's the producer, the music producer?
Yeah.
Yeah. He posts just bits of, it's usually like a line or two on creativity about once a week, and then he deletes it and puts a new one up. And he said something about how you shouldn't try to chase the muse. It doesn't like to be observed. And I was like, man, that is,
I like that.
So, yeah. I mean, it is so much like trying to pursue the phenomena. Like, you can't. And how much creation and the phenomena seem to be intertwined. So when you talk about like the purpose of life is to create, like there's a relationship there that I don't think we're remotely figured out yet, but there is something there.
Yeah. No, there definitely is. And I mean,
there's like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was saying that there's like a balance there too. Because I definitely agree with you that you can't force things like that, and you can't force the phenomena to interact with you. But you can also set up conditions that are conducive to it, right? Like you can't force the muse, but you can also like set up a life where you have the ability to be creative when it strikes, or when the muse does talk to you. And in the same way, like you can you maybe can't force a UFO to appear, but if you never spend any time outside at night, you're never going to see one.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, for sure. And the quote, and I wish I'd saved it. There's obviously, it's like 2 lines long, so it's not leaving room for building an environment that is conducive to the creative process, or those kinds of things. And I would say 80% of what he actually posts is about facilitating that in some way.
Yeah, he's really into, I mean, the way he produces, it's say what you want about him and his look and who he's produced, but in hearing some of the stories of, he uses like bibliomancy and all these really sort of oblique strategies, to borrow from Brian Eno, to try to get places. What they were talking about, I think it was when he was producing System of a Down, they did something for a particular part of that song where they had them essentially go look in a Bible, or they're doing bibliomancy to like crack the bridge for the song, and it's one of the I don't know if people like System of a Down, but it's one of the more memorable parts. I think it's in Chop Suey, that song, which is one of their hits. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that jibes with what he was talking about in kind of going after the muse. I think Rick Rubin's, he's interesting in that way.
The funny thing about System of a Down is that they had sent me an early release of 3 songs before they put out their actual album. And I listened to it and I said, wow, this is really good and different. These guys are going to go nowhere. And, I played them on my radio show and I'm like, yeah, people should love this. It's really, it's quality stuff. It's original.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like anyone else. I mean, there's a touch of Faith No More in there. There's a little touch of this, but it's unique. And I'm like, and unique good stuff never does well. And then the next thing I know, they put Toxicity out and it blows up. And honestly, I thought that was one of the best records that year that came out.
Yeah.
And I was
that
like,
was the Rick Rubin record. I think.
yeah. And I thought it was brilliant, and I can't stand to listen to it anymore.
Yeah.
Because it just got so overplayed and I was thrilled that I was wrong. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, good. Here's a band that deserved to get big. They were doing something unique and different, and they made it. That doesn't happen a lot. At the same time, now I can't listen to them because I'm tired of them.
Yeah, it happens.
But that's how I feel about System of a Down.
Yeah.
I was into them, I was into them first, but, that's because they sent me the tape, and I said, this is cool.
I've been in that situation so many times, yeah. And that's nothing against the band. It's just, it kind of loses. There's something, it becomes, I guess, overplayed, I guess.
Yeah.
That's, the best way to say it.
That's the thing. I mean, if you hear something, no matter how brilliant it is, if you hear something over and over and over and over again, it loses it. Because you're not really hearing it anymore. You're just, it's just too familiar.
Yep.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. Everything Where Did the Road Go related can be found at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. Links to all our social media shows all the way back to the first one. And you can get it all at the website. And subscribe to us on YouTube if you want. Go to our Discord. Yeah, all that fun stuff. If you're into heavy music, I do an underground music show called The Last Eggs of the Lost. It's heavier, darker stuff that you're not going to hear other places generally. And that can be found at thelastexit.org. Now, as far as a recommendation this week, I'm going to go with another Pacific Northwest Stories one called The Last Movie. There were 2 seasons of this. If I remember right, the first season's pretty damn good. The second one was okay. It's kind of a neat idea. I don't want to really give it away. But it's creepy, and it fits their style. I do like a lot of their stuff, even if they don't always seem to know where they're going with their stories. The atmosphere and vibe is very good. They also did Black Tapes, Tanis, Rabbits, which I think I've all recommended in the past. So yeah, I'm also going to recommend The Last Movie. So go check that out if you're looking for something creepy to listen to. All right, now back to the show. So I am here with Saxon and Chris Ernst and Wren. And we're talking about the universe, basically.
Yeah. How many of them are there? Let's count them.
Well, there's that too.
1, 2, 3.
And when we were talking about the Seth material earlier, the other thing Seth would always say is that there's like all these. You're a multi-dimensional personality in the sense that, like there are different paths you could have taken, and those parts of you also exist somewhere. But there's like the prime path that you actually took.
Yeah.
And
I wonder about that sometimes too, like the true detective kind of idea that do you live the same, I mean, we all talk about like reincarnation and stuff, but could it also be true that you live the same life over and over again, maybe in not an infinite number of times, but, like you just basically go through the same sort of life over and over again until you do it right.
Yeah.
Or get it right somehow. And maybe that's where things like deja vu come from if they're not like precognitive.
Kind of almost like after you've made all the possible choices in this path and all the branching paths from it sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a Groundhog Day kind of idea.
Yeah.
I would like to find the hack that allows restore points.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, oh, I wish I could have gone back and did this different or knew this or whatever. But then I'm like, I wouldn't have had the same experience, or where would I be now?
Yeah. There was Dan Millman, if you guys ever read him. He was more on the self-help side of cosmology, I suppose. He wrote like Way of the Peaceful Warrior and stuff like that. Okay. And he had this one quote in there where he was talking about time and possibility and the way things collapse. And he really doesn't believe in fate, but he had this comment where he said, it's really, once things have happened, there's not a lot of things to argue with ourselves about or wish they'd been different.
Right.
Because that's the way things did happen. So that was the way they were supposed to happen.
Right.
Not that there was a fate that things had to happen this way, but because it's sort of like a reverse causality, like, well, that is how they did happen. So that was the way they were supposed to happen. And it was really the way he said it was meant more about just accepting the choices you made. But I thought that was sort of an interesting kind of like backfeed on that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed. I mentioned at the beginning of this, my brother had just passed away yesterday. And the last conversation I had with him was over Facebook at the beginning of July. And the last thing he said to me was, I had this really weird dream about you I need to tell you about. And I said, okay, tell me. And then I think he fell asleep. And he never told me the dream. And now I'm kind of like, man, because I forgot. Like, I forgot he told me that. And now I'm like, and now I'm never going to know what that was. You know, like, was it relevant to what happened to him? Like, so that's one of those things. Like, I wish I could, you know, if nothing else, just be like, hey, dude, what was the dream?
Yeah.
Well, maybe tonight in your dreams, you can, you know, there's a possibility. The one thing that I came across at one point, which I thought was interesting, is that there's in somebody talking about the sort of stages of the death of the physical body, is that, you know, depending on sort of the nature, it is different for everybody, but there is a general 3-day window when there is like a separation, there's like this sort of slower separation of the physical from the astral form. Right. And that there's a 3-day window where the sort of the presence is, you know, is around more. And that's where you get things like, you know, sitting Shiva in the Jewish faith and, other sort of things that it came around, that there is a reality to there being sort of a 3-day window. Whether or not that's true, I have no idea.
Right. But it is common belief. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we look at all this weird stuff, one of the things it does seem to do is steer us toward the spiritual. Like, you know, I mean, whether you're seeing ghosts or, I mean, maybe not so much monsters, but like UFO sightings, aside from when they're co-opted by you know, people hypnotizing people and convincing them they're being abducted by aliens, generally has a more spiritual component to it. I mean, you know, whatever this phenomena is, that is the UFO phenomena, and these encounters, you know, Vallee called it a control system. I mean, Keel looked at it as something demonic that was trying to take over the world. But there does seem to be that element there. It's not a physical phenomena per se, and because it's cross-culture, because it goes back throughout history, there's something intrinsically human about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like it expands the boundaries of what you believe is possible. And when that happens to someone, they inevitably are led towards the non-material as a consequence of that, right? Like if you have an encounter with a Bigfoot or see a UFO or whatever, it sort of shatters your boundaries of what is and can be possible. And so if that happens, then like what else is maybe true, and it opens you up a lot.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought about that a lot too. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I just said it's a good way of saying it.
Yeah, because you know, I grew up. I've talked about this in the show a lot. You know, my mom had a near-death experience a few years before I was born, and then you know there were just superstitions and stories and experiences that like my grandfather had and stuff that were around. So there was always kind of room for this. But you know, I guess I had weird experiences my whole life. But when I got to the point where I am now, probably some of that came from when my dad died when I was 20. And you know, we were talking about that before the show. Like I you know, he was very ill. I knew he was going to die. I don't think my family did the same way that I did. But you know, I had dreams that we were going and getting a house ready together, you know, ready for him to move into, because that's where he was going to go when he died. And then, you know, that week or so after, you know, was that I've talked about this in the show and I still get hesitant to talk about it because it was such a weird experience. You know, when I fell asleep on the couch, you know, and it's nice afternoon out. And then I woke up on the couch and like Jesus was standing at the end of the walkway in front of the house. Mm-hmm. You know, and I went out there to greet him and he was coming inside to like, you know, take my father's spirit with him or something like that.
Right.
And that was just utterly bizarre in a lot of ways. It was very emotional. And, you know, and that was, you know, I had been in anthropology for a long time and been a weird kid for a long time. So I was definitely not a, you know, Christian by any means, although my dad was. So maybe that's why that happened. And also Jesus was a white guy. It was very much the, the image you see in the Renaissance paintings, personified. It was not a Middle Eastern man. Mm-hmm. And I had dreams after that where he and I were sitting around with the other family members and he was telling us how things were, needed to be done and stuff like that. Yeah. And so I'd say it changed my perspective in different ways because I valued my experiences differently, particularly the strange ones. Mm-hmm. And just understanding the limited time I had made me embrace all of these things more.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's definitely been my experience over the years. It's been difficult to I don't know, sometimes even talk to people about death, especially people who are more materialist. Because, I've mentioned before, both me and my little brother have had spontaneous out-of-body experiences since we were kids. And so for me, I'm fairly confident that I'm more than my physical body. I have pretty good amount of evidence that I am. And so and having that evidence changes the way you interact world and stuff, and sometimes in ways that I think make me feel almost like I come across as insensitive to certain people who would talk about death or scared of death or something. I'm just it's a thing that's going to happen to everyone, and it's not really that big of a deal. But then again, too, I also know what it's like to lose people who are close to you, and I don't know, the dream thing is interesting because that's you were mentioning that, Chris, and Saxon, you were just mentioning the dream thing. I actually had a lot of peace that I found after I had a friend that I had roommates with for years, and he committed suicide several years ago. And I had a dream a couple of years after he committed suicide where I just met him somewhere and talked to him and caught up with him and, seemed he was doing well and everything. And just that when I woke up, I just felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. It was really important for me to know that he was all right, wherever he was. Yeah. Yeah. And that access, that's, I'm going to Noticon in a couple days, and I'm giving a talk about katabasis and the underworld and stuff. And that's the big through line for that talk is that it's possible to travel to the underworld, to undergo katabasis, because and the gateway to that is through dreams, and that the underworld is a reality, but the underworld is inside of us. It's in all of our heads. The way down is in rather than down.
Right.
Do you hold any credence to sort of the idea that what we call the subconscious is trying to represent the underworld?
That's an interesting idea. I haven't thought of it like that, but that's kind of, I think, where my thoughts are sort of moving to, that the underworld sort of exists within all of us, and that it's sort of the same thing as the imaginal.
Well, it's connected, it's a tunnel. Yeah, they're tunneled together. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this too, just for everybody. Do you feel like there are certain people that have passed on that you seem to have more access to than others?
I don't know.
Or feel closer in some way or other that you could communicate with, at least through dreams or feelings or something like that?
Not really.
Yeah. I don't think so for myself.
Yeah.
I don't
I don't communicate with anyone in that way. So, yeah.
I've only had a handful of experiences meeting dead people sort of in dreams and stuff. So there hasn't been any repeats really.
Since my mom died, she's been in my dreams almost every night, but it never feels like her. There's been, she'll just pop up in the dream. She'll just, other stuff will be going on. My mom will be there.
Yep.
It's just okay, I think this is just my my subconscious's way of dealing with that loss. It just puts her in my dreams.
Yeah.
But there was even one point where, I literally looked at her and said, "You're not real. You're just in my dream. This is just a dream. You're not real. Nice to have you here, though, But I had the one about Jeff Ritzmann. I don't know. If any of you guys, I don't remember who was on the show when I talked about that, but I was. So he, where I went to, I dreamed I was just hanging out with him at his house, which I never did. That never happened. And at some point in the dream, I realized this is a dream, and I looked at him in the dream and said, "Well, I wish this had actually happened in real life, and I actually got to meet you face to face." And suddenly, it didn't feel like a dream anymore. And he said, "That's why you're here now."
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I don't know, was that really Jeff? I have no idea. It might have just been my brain, kind of fulfilling that sense. I don't know.
Well, so actually you talking about that got me thinking about this again now that you mention it, because their dreams and otherwise just, things materializing in my regular life and things like that. There seem to be certain people I was close to that are closer than others. And, definitely like that dream separation you're talking about where that this is just part of a dream versus like, this means something.
Right.
Whether it's, we want to say it's this person coming through somehow or whatever. But yeah, like there are certain folks that I just feel like there's no way to reach them. And I couldn't tell you why that is, but it's like, there's the phone doesn't connect on the other side.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing or it's saying anything bad about that person or anything about concepts beyond the flesh, but there just seems for me to be people I have better access to.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And again, that might be coming down to the people we're close to outside of this reality versus the people we're close to here.
That's a good point too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question for practical necromancy, really. Like, what are the criteria for being able to contact someone? I mean, at least in Greek necromancy, a lot of times it was considered more effective to like do dream incubation on the person's actual grave. So like if you would go to their tomb, you would go to their grave and you go to sleep on their grave, and like that proximity was supposed to make it sort of, I guess, easier to contact. But there's sure. Like a lot of the contours of that, like I don't really have any answers for. I don't know why it would be more difficult to contact one person than another.
Yeah, I don't know. And it occurred to me, like, I mean, we could speculate forever. Like they're at different stages of their own journey, or, they've gone deeper out there to look at something else, maybe. I mean, I'm speaking about that abstractly completely.
There's something that actually I remember from Seth that was, I think it was in the one that I was reading recently, which was Seth Speaks, where he's talking about how some people over-identify their consciousness with their body.
Yes.
And that creates, like, they linger around the body, or it creates more physical torment. Yeah.
So the first thing that struck me about Seth, I was in a deep depression and almost dark night of the soul type of depression. I had lost any sense of faith in anything. I was just, I don't know. And I was researching near-death experiences, seeing if there was anything new. And I would look at these websites that, for the most part, were just like, oh, these were actually, seems sort of scientific, like they would be pretty practical and stuff. But then they bring up Seth. And I'm like, why does Seth keep coming up? Like, of all, like, why would you put the channeled work into this? And I had Seth speak. So I took up the book and I started flipping through it. And I looked at the chapter of what happens when you die. And in it, that's what he talks about. So he says that some people, he says, first of all, when you're born, some people immediately identify with their, when they're still very, very, in the utero. Other people don't actually become fully conscious until after they're born. They can be alive for a little bit without, actually being there. And then he says when people die, some people will leave their body before they're dead, whereas others will try to cling to the body and stay long after it's dead. And so he's like listing these variations, and I'm reading this, and I had just read this paper this heart doctor did, talking about how A, people can have near-death experiences when they haven't died, and B, some people didn't have near-death experiences. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. If you're not leaving your body, if you're particularly attached. And then, of course, Seth also goes on to say that essentially what you believe deep down is what's going to happen to you when you die at first.
That's what I've heard from many people, too. Yeah.
At first. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he says it's an illusion, but because your belief creates that illusion. So when you die, that sometimes spirits will help you along and slowly, get you used to the being outside of this, our reality and back into that reality.
Yeah. That's a fact. That's a thing that comes up in Robert Monroe's books as well. That,
Really?
Totally.
like sort of like they're like little waiting rooms for different types of people, right? So like whatever religion you are, if you were like a devout believer in that religion, there's sort of like a little, there's like a heaven that you go to for a little while until you're able to accept the reality of like what's happened, and that once you kind of get that, okay, there's more to this than what I thought, then you can kind of move on or get reincarnated or whatever.
Yes, Seth said something like, if you believe deep down nothing's going to happen, that there's nothing after death. He said you might sort of experience sort of like a lull. You'll still be conscious, but you'll think, oh, I'm dead. There's nothing here. And then slowly you'll realize I'm still conscious.
Yeah.
There's a similar thing in like Orphic stuff too that I thought was striking when I read it the other day, about how in sort of the Elysian Fields, these shades can choose to be reincarnated, but in order to do so, they are required to drink of the waters of Lethe in order to forget their past lives. Like that's the only way they're allowed to reincarnate, which makes sense, right? Can you imagine trying to live if you had the collective trauma in thousands of generations?
That's what I was told too, is that it's like the reason why you must drink the waters of Lethe, that you are aware of your different like when you are essentially your consciousness is inhabiting whatever is happening in between your incarnations physically, but that because you have, and in the Hindu cosmology, it's like 84 lakhs, which is 84 million reincarnations you have to go through. So 84 million reincarnations, if you had all of those stacked on top of one another in your sort of human body form, you would go nuts. Right. And that it's essentially a safety mechanism.
The same thing in like Chinese thought too, where there's it's like a soup of forgetfulness. It's like a soup that's made by Ming Po, I think.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. The Lethe thing always fascinated me because, it makes sense. It really does. And you wonder, when you see people who seem to remember their past lives and they have things like birthmarks, like maybe that memory wasn't completely lost, or maybe it's never completely lost because you're always connected to it.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't drink enough, but that's the other concept in Orphic theology too, is the pool of Mnemosyne, where there's another river, another pool that allows you to keep all of your memories, but sort of move that, like that's how you break samsara in that theology. That's how you sort of escape the cycle of reincarnation, is by drinking from that pool instead.
And maybe at some point you become able, like if you've done this enough, you're like, all right, okay, I can handle it this time. I don't know.
Yeah. And, I thought about that too. And, one of the questions of this show was the idea, like, why are we into this stuff? Why are we drawn to it? I've had the idea too that maybe you're just you're on that incarnation where you're going to drink from the other pool this time. Like you've slowly been drawn to it. And maybe some people aren't, or some people don't care about it because they haven't been led to that. They haven't done all of their runs yet.
Well, that's the idea of the path, or the many paths, is that there are sort of many paths to the goal. Some lead, in a sort of wandering, lazy route past the seaside. Some are more direct, and that everybody has their own particular path, that they sort of have to go through, why they're different. I don't know.
Well, what was the quote from Crowley roughly was like, God is the same mountain named different things by different people with different paths to the top, but it's all still the same mountain.
Yeah.
Obviously he climbed mountains, so that's why that became an analogy for him.
Yeah.
But I always like that because it makes sense. It's not that that only one person is right. It's that, there's everyone's path is different. Everyone's life is different. And I feel like that's something too many people don't really have a concept of. They just expect everyone to think and be the same way.
Yeah, that's what I've talked about, people trying to convince, especially like on social media and stuff, that like things like astrology are real, or that magic's real, or whatever. What I've tried explaining to people is that like that you can't really do that. Like, people are going to find it if they want to find it. Yeah. You can't force anyone to walk a certain path, right? They'll come to it. Come to it. It may not even be in this life.
Yeah, and the thing is, every single person on this planet has had a different experience in life. They've had different things happen to even twins. As much alike as twins may be, they've both had different perspectives on what's going on, and the more different your life is, the more difference those experiences are, and there's where we have varying opinions. But it seems like in our culture now, someone has to be right and someone has to be wrong, rather than understanding that this person thinks this because A, B, and C, and this person thinks this because of A, B, and C, and and it's just all of our perspectives are different. And it's okay that people have different perspectives. I mean, yes, some of them can be harmful, but again, those harmful, things have come about because of the things they've experienced. So, I think the bigger thing is trying to get people to understand that A, everyone's life is different, and B, not everyone is going to think the same, and nor are they meant to.
Yeah, there's that real rush to tribal dualism, right? Where you're absolutely correct in all of your opinions, and then the other person not only is incorrect in all of their opinions, but are actually evil or actually like malicious. When in reality, the truth is somewhere like way more in the middle. Like there are very few people in this world that I feel like are truly malicious, like truly sociopathic people.
Yes.
It's a relatively rare thing. Like most people are the way they are because of the way they were raised and the experiences they've had during their life. And just vilifying them for that isn't going to change anything. If anything, it's only going to temper their resolve to have those opinions, right? Like the way forward isn't just to mock them or try to get them fired or whatever. Like none of that helps.
No, because it just proves to them that you're the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Further solidifies that dualism.
If we learn to find the things that we agree on versus the things focusing on the things we disagree on, I think most people agree on a lot more than they realize.
Yeah. Because ultimately we're all human. We all have similar desires, even if we don't, we come up and go about them in different ways. Most of us kind of want the same things out of life.
Yeah. And it's okay to enjoy life.
It is. Despite it, as crotchety and cranky as I sound on the show a lot of times, I'm kind of like Wren. Like I try to think that everybody's doing the best with what they have at that moment. And obviously we're not all walking around like I've got to do the best I can all the time, because that would be exhausting. But everybody's just reasonably doing what they're capable of to survive.
With varying degrees of self-awareness.
Varying degrees of self-awareness and resources and faculties and tools to, interrelate with the world around them and everything else. I had a connection in here to this, and I'm not going to segue to it at all, so I'm just going to throw it out here. When we were talking about, your brother's dream that you didn't get to find out. Yeah. I also think sometimes we are meant to be posed with questions and things that are never answered.
Yeah.
Because it's like flavoring. It
adds some mystery to our lives.
Yeah.
Mystery, right.
And it's just what value and color can you make from that experience and the way those things add up. I don't know that I probably got that more from after my dad passed away than anything else. But I do think, it's like the phenomenon too. I think it's there for us never to have an answer for it.
Yeah. Just to drive us forward.
Yeah. It's just there to drive us forward and have us be curious in different ways.
So we are out of time. But real quick, where can people find you, Wren?
I maintain a blog at liminalroom.com, and I've got some links to social media stuff there, so people can find me on Blue Sky or whatever Twitter is going to be called now, whatever it'll be called next week. I have no idea. But I've also got a link to my Discord server on there as well. If for some reason the invite doesn't work, just send me an email.
Okay.
But yeah, pretty easy to contact.
Chris?
Brightrectangle.com. That's how you can contact me. I don't really do social. And you can see links to my films and work there.
And Super Saxon Man?
The Super Saxon Man is, he hangs out on Instagram under Super Infoman.
Oh, weird.
It is friends with Matt Festa on there. And then I'm not as cool as Wren. I don't have a Blue Sky account. I'm only on Threads.
Okay.
And Saxon is on Facebook if you look for him.
And you're also on Discord.
Yes, I am. I'm in the Discord for Where Did the Road Go I always keep tabs on that, and occasionally, I'll jump in, but I usually read most of everything that gets posted in there.
Nice. I thank you guys very much for having this conversation with me tonight, because I definitely needed it.
Absolutely, Seriah. Thanks.
Absolutely glad to.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Billuminati, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Tim, Matthew Sproul, Andrew Nichols, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, A Crocodile, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very, very much. I want to thank everyone who sent me condolences on the passing of my brother. I appreciate it very much. I'm not able to get back to everybody, so I just kind of wanted to just thank everyone here who contacted me about it. It's very much appreciated. And a special thank you to Nagatha Christie, who sent over some nice treats. I want to welcome some new patrons this month. Ed, Jay Victor, Glenn Messer, A Crocodile, Dave Baxter, Ryan, and Gravy Jones. And a thanks to Mark Bowley for upping his pledge as well. All right, that's all from me this week. I'll see you all next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.